Hello everybody, this is Alistair Prentice here in Tokyo, Japan. I'm glad you could join us. It's a privilege and we're lucky to be able to speak to Dr. Stephen Gilligan and Robert Dilts. They are back in Japan. We're just finishing the final module of a 15-day basic coaching program in generative coaching. And as I said, lucky enough to have them both together, same time, same place, to talk just a little bit about generative change and also about the association that they have been evolving and have now founded together, the International Association for Generative Change. So maybe I could just ask you both a little bit about the evolution of the association and what is generative change?
Well, I think, Robert and I have known each other for almost 40 years. And it's been a long, strange trip. And we've been collaborating.
In a good way.
Mostly, yeah. We've been collaborating for about 15 years.
At least maybe getting closer to 20.
20 years.
It was actually 94 that we first, wow. I remember coming down to visit you in San Diego in 1994 after summer. So it's been almost 20 years that we've been, I think, actively collaborating.
And the collaboration sort of has culminated in the last 5 years or so in this international association that we have developed, IAGC, International Association for Generative Change. And I think, maybe the most simple way to begin is to ask, what is generative change? We're both interested, we have our own individual ways, but also share this collective vision about how we can bring positive transformational change into many, many areas of the planet at a very, very difficult, challenging time. So the work of the IAGC is about a vision of how to do that, a set of methodologies by which it can be done, and a set of platforms by which we can be able to implement that.
So the notion of generative change, generative means to generate, to create something different, something new. And as Stephen was saying, when you look at the sort of challenges that face us today, we cannot continue business as usual, as they say. We cannot look back to old methods. We've got to create things that have not yet existed before. And so the essence of generative change is we're going somewhere completely new. Another implication, though, of generative is that in order to get somewhere new, you need to do that through a certain quality of interaction. So the sort of fundamental principle of generativity is not that 1 + 1 makes 2, but 1 + 1 makes 3. So there is a sort of an emerging, entity, an emerging energy that comes from the dynamic between two or more. And so what we're doing, these methodologies then are oriented around how do we get this creative quality of interaction directed towards, or in a direction that is going to bring, as Stephen said, positive transformation.
No, you talk about generative collaboration, lest it sound too esoteric. It's at the heart of all creativity. We see it in sports teams, we see it in political or business teams, we see it in healthy creative marriages, we see it internally inside of really creative, dynamic people. That you've got, in essence, in every system, what we call a holon. Which means that at one level you've got these parts that are whole in and of themselves. So Robert is whole, Alistair is whole, Stephen is whole, but we're also part of a greater whole at another level. So to enact transformational change, we're looking at how to be able to tap into those multiple levels simultaneous. As good, musical groups do, as
successful sports teams do,
as healthy creative marriages do, so forth and so on.
So I think that what again, as Steve was saying, it's not an esoteric approach, and in fact, basically some of the core principles of what we're doing in generative change is starting with this very, very fundamental, concrete assumption that our nervous system, our body, our being is a filter on reality. And that filter can either open to positive, new possibilities, or you can sort of filter things out, shut down, and kind of go into what we would call neuromuscular lock, or our acronym of CRASH, contracted, reactive, kind of caught in analysis paralysis, separated, and hurting some way. So a lot of our methodologies are first and foremost about how do we bring our individual nervous systems into a generative state, and then how do we create, through the collaboration, a mutually generative container or field, we would call it, and then direct that towards some kind of intention. And I think that's another key principle is you're always working in a direction rather than simply trying to reach a particular destination. So we talk about the difference between direction versus destination, because when you're acting generatively, you don't usually know where you're going to end up when you begin, but you do know, I'm going that way.
So we, as you know, we both have Irish backgrounds, so we could just talk on and on and on. I don't know if there's anything particular you wanted to ask.
Sure, yes. That's a really nice kind of big frame picture of the association of what you've been doing all these years together, and some of the new stuff which is going to be incorporated in the idea of generative change. You mentioned aesthetic intelligence as well. I guess that has a part to play with how these pieces come together in systems and wholes.
This idea of wholeness and harmony has to do with how parts are within themselves and how they relate to each other in a larger whole.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so again, aesthetic is how the parts fit together into a whole, and that would apply to a good cooked meal, how the ingredients all fit together until you have something that is delicious. It could apply to members of a musical group. You're looking to, you hear musicians talk about finding their space inside of whatever they're playing, where they can make their individual contribution, but have it be part of some greater expression called the music. So, if you look at every especially creative aspect of human performance, I think you will see this part-whole aesthetic intelligence question. So as I say, it's something we've been working with, and it informs us, and we've developed all these methodologies, if you would call it that. Robert, in essence, he was starting to articulate the general steps of a model.
Yeah, we have a 6-step model of generative change.
Right.
And actually speaking of this notion of aesthetic intelligence and part and whole, I think one of the other really, sort of foundational aspects of our approach to generative change is the way in which we deal with so-called negative influences, obstacles, resistances, etc. The traditional approach is you've got to break through the obstacle, you've got to get rid of the resistance, you've got to suppress any anything that's going against this movement towards your direction. But actually, looked at from the perspective of this aesthetic intelligence, everything has its place. So we would say, a key part of our work in generative change is that nothing is good or bad in and of itself. It's all in your relationship with it and its relationship to the whole. So a lot of our methodologies are kind of working with this, what we might call creative nonviolence, notion of aikidoing a seemingly negative, whether it's a negative emotion, a negative person, a seemingly negative person. How do we approach that so that it's actually, incorporating and contributing to
Fantastic. I'm sure a lot of people viewing might be particularly interested in some applications. I know one of the applications that you both spend a lot of time and effort on, and training all around the world, Paris, Spain, China, Japan, many other places, is generative coaching. I wonder if you could just say a little bit about the generative coaching approach and what some of the kind of special features might be that kind of go beyond traditional coaching.
Again, Robert was sort of alluding to some of those special features, but let's think about, coaching in terms of how we would really want to think about any aspect of life, is that what can you do to be able to have this healthy, happy, high performance, high quality, creative path in your life. So when people come to us for coaching, whatever their backgrounds, that's what sort of the shared underlying question that we presuppose in some way. So the steps that we take, first thing that you need to do is relax. Because if you're trying to get somewhere,
we say, open the channel.
It's the act of trying to get somewhere and having all this stuff going on in your head that is blocking you from being able to hook up to the deeper music, if you will. So say relax, let go, empty out, tune in. So that's the first step. We call it the coach state. The next key question is, what intention do you want to set? Which direction? Robert was alluding to, intentions are different than goals. Goals are very important, especially look in the next step. What is this specific goal connected? But we might say, the most important intention that we want to support is, I want to bring something that I feel inside of me, or I feel connected to. I want to bring it into the living world. And if you can connect with that and feel that and continue to come back to it, it will positively inform and guide all of your thinking, all of your behavior, so forth.
So this notion of really sort of connecting in with a sense of passion. And again, you say, how is generative coaching different than any other coaching? All coaching is about going from some kind of present state to some kind of desired state. Here's where I am, I'm trying to get there, and I need to get some resources. I'm also going to encounter certain obstacles, and I need to address these obstacles. In generative coaching, that desired state is not a familiar state, right? It's not something that I've done before, or maybe anybody has done before. So this idea of I'm wanting to bring something into the world, but in particular, something new and something unique that is through me. So generative coaching is for those kind of situations. Now we're saying that many of today's situations and many of the kind of problems people encounter today, you can't just go, let me kind of look in the book and find out what's the recipe. I've got to make a new recipe. And so we have these 6 steps of generative coaching for how we guide somebody to be able to connect into that place, sort of empty out, connect into that place, and then begin to move into action. And then in doing so, of course, you're going to encounter obstacles and you're going to transform them.
Yeah. So you mentioned this encountering these so-called obstacles and bringing in complementarities and other possibilities. There also seems to be a strong element of somatic work and using the intelligence not just of the cognitive mind but of the body mind, the wisdom there. I wonder if you could maybe just...
As beginning to say, the first 2 steps are sort of empty out, get mindful, to get a positive intention. Third is develop a creative performance state that is relevant to whatever domain you're working in. We say there's 3 types of mind that we're working with here. The first basic platform mind is the somatic mind. So it's the mammal mind, it's the child's mind. It's the underlying driver for all that you're doing up here.
Essentially a non-verbal mind.
It's connected to the history far beyond you individually. So we want to tune that and get that to places that we would use terms like centering, mind-body centering to get to. There's a second mind, we call the cognitive mind, especially all your verbal processes, your beliefs, your intentions,
your plans, your strategies, your thinking,
the meanings that you give things. We want to fine-tune that to a high, what we would call generative level.
And align it. A lot of times this mind is trying to control the somatic mind, or there becomes conflict there. So by tuning and aligning, you're sort of kind of freeing of any friction. And then we're opening to what we would call the third mind, which I think is one of the keys to, I think one of the really sort of unique things about generative coaching is this connecting out to what some people might call the creative unconscious. We call it a field mind, which is beyond an individual mind. People like Carl Jung use terms like a collective consciousness or unconscious. And so it is generally where all of the, if you look at geniuses, I've written a series of books on strategies of genius, and every single genius says the same thing. These genius ideas do not come out of my conscious logical thinking. They come to me from somewhere that I cannot, concretely, either name or explain. And so this is this notion of a field, a creative unconscious, and that is where I think you really have the most powerful potential for transformation.
So basically the somatic mind, in response to your question, that's the first one. But what we're coaching people to do is how to tune into each of these three minds. Usually we see where somebody's stuck, they're in this state of lock. And we say it's the state that you're in that is most responsible for producing the reality that you experience. So if you want to create a new, more positive reality, you first got to release your state, which is the first step. You got to set an intention, and then develop this high-level creative state, which starts somatically, includes cognitive beliefs, so forth, the field awareness that you have.
And the fourth step is then you begin to move into action, because all coaching is essentially ultimately focused on behavior. That's why it's called coaching, because it's not teaching, it's not explaining, it's not advising, it's coaching, which is you're beginning then to bring this into actual, concrete expressions, actions. So you're beginning to perform and coming up with a kind of a critical path. Right? So if I have my direction, I am creatively now beginning to build. So sometimes again, if there is no previous path, if there is no existing path, I have to create the way there. So this is this notion of beginning to move into actions. And
clear out, set an intention, develop a creative state, start to take action, and then the fifth of the 6 steps is prepare to be possessed by demons. Prepare that, particularly the bigger your dream, the more creative life that you want to create, the more you're going to run into big obstacles. And rather than getting shocked by them or flattened by them or taking them personally, we see these as integral elements for a positive creative life. So we spend a lot of time both from martial arts like Aikido or the work of Milton Erickson about how to be able to transform these negatives into positives. Robert was alluding earlier, and with creative nonviolence, without trying to break something in order to create something, but how to be able to, in your own state, absorb this and transform it into a positive.
So this idea that you will, there is no creative effort without resistance. When you get outside of the old box, there's going to be a lot of things that are going to, in some ways you're shaking the tree, you're rocking the boat, etc. You're actually kind of disrupting the status quo, and that will bring objections both internally and externally, and you've got to expect that. And rather than fight against it, to be able to also creatively deal with that. And in fact, we would say it's, as Stephen was pointing out, that these things that emerge often as kind of symptoms or obstacles are actually within them is the key to being able to actually achieve what you want. So rather than get rid of them, you're finding what you might call the buried treasures within them. And I think that's probably one of the main, sort of unique aspects of generative coaching. And the final aspect of generative coaching, the sixth step, is in order to continue to progress, we have this notion of sort of a practice, generative practice as a foundation for conscious living and an increasing wholeness. So this idea that coaching is always, and if you're a sports coach, what you primarily do is you run practices, right? You practice sessions to get things, as we say, in the muscle.
If you coach any performance art, whether it's sports, whether it's music,
singing, dancing,
every one of those contexts, people would say, you're only as good as your practices.
Yeah.
So somehow we've gotten, on things like traditional coaching or therapy, we have this idea that if you just think about it and understand it once, then you've mastered it. But in a competitive business, in an intimate relationship, in your own life development, if you don't continue to grow and transform every day, is that whatever positive you had at one point, you're going to lose it. So the key to long-term healthy development is your practices. So for example, at this point, when I coach somebody, I require that they're going to make a commitment to do a minimal amount of time each day to personal practices that we work out in the coaching would be, really work for them, that they'd like them, that they make sense, that they would be helpful to what they're trying to develop. Most people say, well, I'd like to, but, and I don't have time. So we really emphasize, Freud used to say that the twin pillars of the good life are your work and your intimacy relationships, your family, your friends, so forth. We say that's not enough, because if you give most of your time, which most of us in modern life do, we give most of our time to our work and hope we have some time for our family, that we don't have any time for our personal practices. And both of those other places are really great, and you can have the best intimacy and the most wonderful work, but you've got a lot of responsibilities to attend to others and so forth. So the personal practice is, how do I build this connection so that come what may, is that I have access to my calmness, to my intelligence, to my curiosity, to my positive responsiveness and so forth. That takes a lot of practice.
So anybody, for example, a gymnast competing for an Olympic medal knows, I'm going to be practicing. I'll be spending a good deal of my time practicing. Here we also use the concept not only of, that would be sort of an outer game practice. There's also an inner game practice. Stephen was saying, I got to also practice my state, so being able to be calm under difficult circumstances, etc. And we apply these same principles, by the way, not only in coaching context, but we have a generative leadership program. We have a generative collaboration, which involves people working in groups and teams. Stephen does a generative trance, which is about using these same principles and the variations of these 6 steps to work in businesses, to work in group and team situations, as well as personal transformation.
The generative change is sort of the center of the wheel,
Yeah.
if you will. And we see all these different applications where people are really looking to develop transformational change in the world in many different communities. that's what, part of what drives us and excites us and inspires us is we travel all around the world and we see this.
Yeah.
And we see people wanting to develop these communities where they can go further, where they can share, where they can collaborate. So we hope that IAGC is one platform where people can do just that.
So if people are interested in this kind of positive transformation, join us at IAGC.
Great, that's a beautiful kind of summary and kind of picture of what you're doing with the IAGC and generative change. I wonder if you could just finally say a few things to people in Japan and Tokyo and Osaka and other places like that. You'll be coming back next year for the beginning of another 1 year. It's a course of 1 year.
Well, the
Long
first thing we'd
15
like to
days.
say is hello to Japan.
Hi, Japan.
Yeah.
We're
We love you.
we're happy to be here.